of negotiating trade deals. Trade deals have been negotiated for the last 50 years almost by the EU. You don't have that expertise. And it's a very, very difficult thing to do. And it just shows in how they discuss things like the WTO. I mean, I've only visited once, but I spent part of a day last year at the WTO in Geneva, and this is not the home of free trade. This is a very much a rules-based organisation which endeavours to regulate what takes place. It is not a place where you breathe in and say, I'm going to have a deal with you tomorrow and this is going to work wonderfully well. It's not what it's about. But I can't get into their minds, nor do I wish to get into their minds. I just think that we need to have a very calm approach to this and say, we do not believe they're telling the truth. Please. Yes.
Hello. Yeah, Michael, near the end of your talk, you said that Scotland will have a choice. It's a British Brexit or as an independent EU member state. Surely there's more than that. Surely there are other choices. I came along to Leslie Riddoch's talk in here, and she explained that there should be more choices if there's another. It's not necessarily Scotland going straight back into the European Union. So surely there'll be more.
Yes,
more choices than just that.
Well, you could choose not to be in the EU or in EFTA, but to have a skexit, right? And to be out of the EU. I just don't see what that would get us. And we've had this conversation before. I believe membership of the EU is the right thing to do. EFTA is an interesting one because it's a compromise. EFTA was designed, the EFTA EEA membership, European Economic Area membership, was designed for countries that wanted to come into the EU. Now, some like Norway, Liechtenstein, haven't done so, Iceland. They've stayed within that arrangement. And it's a good enough arrangement for them. But it's not as good as full membership. And you don't, for example, get to take part in decision making. There's a consultation mechanism. So if you're going to be in that, for me, that's a compromise at the moment. It's a compromise for where we find ourselves. And it's a compromise I would accept as being better than Brexit. But I don't, personally, and that's the government's position, but there could be another position. The government's position is being a full member of the EU serves our purpose and the purpose of small nations particularly well. Let me give you a concrete example, which is this much maligned freedom of movement, right? Freedom of movement isn't actually totally free. You really have to have a job in most of the definitions that exist, and you can't stay forever if you don't have a job. But freedom of movement allows us, as a small country that isn't reproducing ourselves, to be able to continue to operate economically, and particularly here. All the local authority areas on the west coast of Scotland are losing population. Right? Now, you could say we'll breed more effectively, but that's not going to give us working age population for another 20 years or so, right? So that's a period of time in which we're not going to be able to do that. We're also aging, so there are some limitations upon us being able to do so. So how are you going to be able to operate as we do at present without migration? Now, Brexiteers, I've heard Michael Gove. Michael Gove and I have debated this point, actually. Gove says the European system is unfair because it favours European nationals and it discriminates against non-European nationals. So we need a fair system. But and he often talks about prejudice against the Bangladeshi builder in favour of the Polish plumber. But actually what he wants is neither. You don't want migration. We need migration. Now, I could argue all sorts of cases, and I don't think you would agree in terms of the cultural and social benefits of migration, but economically, we need migration. So being within the EU and observing the four freedoms fully is advantageous to us, and we should do so. Now, Switzerland has this odd relationship that's treaty-based, and it's tried to resist freedom of movement, but it's largely failed to do so. So in these circumstances, I think for a small country, with some considerable advantages in terms of assets, but some considerable needs, particularly in terms of workforce, it's the best deal for us. Now, Of course, that will be a matter for political contention. I think, given the result of the referendum and the recent polling, most people agree with that, but there will be people who don't. And the latest poll on this stuff tended to indicate that there were about, I think there was 19% of people who thought that the SNP was too pro-EU, SNP voters, right? And I accept that there will be that. That's a difficulty. I'm just trying to persuade people that I'm not too pro-EU. I just think it's worked for us. And I think the evidence says that that will be the right thing for us. And that's what I would argue. Yeah. Microphone? Sorry.
So, firstly, a little comment from my youth, which was, I think Michael Gove forgets our Fida Sane pet, which came from a situation where I think people went the other way, if I remember rightly.
Still do.
Yeah.
Lots and lots of people go to work in.
Yeah. That was for sort of the same reasons that people are coming this way. Mm-hmm. But I wonder if there are two things here. One is EFTA again. I'll raise that one because does that make it easier or more difficult or make no difference if the UK is out of Europe and has some no deal or crazy deal? Does it make it easier for us to find some middle ground? And do you feel that we might need the sort of arrangement that Finland has in terms of joining the EU as a full member to give it some sort of protection against the rather bullying next door neighbour that was bigger? Would we feel that do you feel we might find ourselves in that circumstance? I'm not mentioning any next door neighbour in either case, quite deliberately.
Well, I think there are security reasons why we should be, part of the EU. But I'm one of these people who's argued for a very long time in this party, as some people know, that NATO membership is important for Scotland. That's not always been a popular position in the SNP, but I think just your size means that you have to recognize size and geography. You have to recognise our geopolitical issues. We are on the Icelandic Gap. That's a big, big issue. And we're also a small country, and therefore we need a defence association of some sort. So those issues are in there. In terms of EFTA membership, I don't think it's any easier than anything else. I think if we find ourselves out after next March, which must at least be a reasonable prospect, and we were to choose independence, how would we get back in? Well, the process would be accession. We're sort of going through an accession in reverse at the moment. I had a fascinating conversation with a group of European Court of Justice judges some months ago, and the very nice woman from Cyprus who had been involved in their negotiations for accession, suddenly a light bulb went off her head and said, but really what you're doing is you're just doing accession in reverse. And that's what we're doing. So to some extent we'd be prepared for that. As I've indicated, some people think it would be a reasonably easy accession. Whether joining EFTA and EEA and working our way in that gradually would be a better way, I think would be discussion at the time. I think EFTA would be quite pleased. EFTA has difficulty, I think, envisaging the UK as a member, though I think that would be possible. But Scotland fits the profile of an EFTA member very, very effectively. So I think they'd be quite pleased. That would be a decision for us to make. My own view is that we should seek to re-enter and do that as a full member and show willing that we want to do that. If we follow that route, I think there will be a lot of support for us in Europe. Not unanimous. We've got the question of Spain always raises its head, but I think there's a lot of support for us. And one of the things that, as a government, we've been very engaged in, and I'm very conscious of this, and I do it a lot, particularly when I'm in the European Parliament, is actually say to people, hang on, you've got a nation of 5 million people here, 62% of whom voted, of those who voted not to leave. You have an obligation to those citizens. I often hear from people who say, I don't want to lose my European passport. And that is an issue for people. And therefore, I think it's something, it's not a card at the present moment that they look at very strongly, but it might be a strong card to play in accession. We also have observed the acquis. We've had over 40 years of observing the acquis. We observe all the things that are required in those circumstances in terms of rule of law, procedures. So I just think that's the right thing for us to do. But it's a debate. It's a discussion. There may be people of different views. But the Scottish Government's view at the moment is membership of the EU would be the right thing to do. And, EEA and EFTA, EEA countries are not in the Common Agricultural Policy or the Common Fisheries Policy, but again, that would be a discussion to be had. Reforming the Common Fisheries Policy along the lines of what it actually is about might be a very important thing to do. Conscious of time, perhaps a couple more from people who, Alistair, there, and anybody else wants to ask a question. Alistair, and then one more.
Thanks, Mick. I kind of like to try and bring it local and localise this a little bit. I have a great fear that when Brexit happens, the economy is going to crash, the pound is going to lose its value, and the cost of food is definitely going to increase. And right now, the second stage on the Community Empowerment Act within allotments is taking place.
Right.
And it will soon be there that what the local authorities have to do and what they can and can't do in implementation. And I'm just wondering if the Scottish Government could work with the administrations and local authorities to make land easy, including government offices, to make land available for people to grow food. That's part one, and if that's at all possible. The second aspect is, well, another one of my favourite subjects is industrial hemp, and that the government works again with the local authority administrations to create the protocols necessary for farmers to quickly enable themselves to make use of this product, because it is going to become available within pretty quickly. So I'm just wondering.
Let me deal with the second one, because you've already steered that one successfully through the party conference. I mean, I am not involved in the slightest, but as your local MSP, that is the party's view that we should be doing it, and I'm sure you and others will pressure the party in government to do so. On the first one, I don't want to, I don't want us to get to the position that we're saying to people, you better go out and grow more courgettes, because otherwise you're going to starve. But I do think that we need to say, and this is out with Brexit, Alistair, you know my view is, as a former Environment Minister, I want to see more allotments. I want to see land that's owned by government and government agencies made available for community use, including local authority land. You know, that the record of this local authority and community asset transfer is not yet very good, and I encourage the local authority to do more. And as you know, wearing my local MSP hat, I'll do everything I can to encourage that. I think it's the right thing to happen, and I hope it will happen. I want it to happen. You know, the Environment Minister is the largest landowner in Scotland. You know, I had that dubious distinction for 2.5 years, followed by an even more unlikely candidate to be the largest landowner in Scotland, Rosanna Cunningham. I say that as a friend of hers, just in case this recording offends her in any sense. But the government has a lot of land, and it should be possible for some of that land to be accessed. Local authorities have lots of land too. I'd like to see it put to more productive use in small quantities, and people with the opportunity to have allotments and grow vegetables, I'd be enthusiastic about. How could I not be? You know. Any final question? Alec, I'll take Alec, and I'll take one over there. So take Alec and then one there. Okay, fine. Can we have your microphone?
Thanks, Michael. Last question here. I'm just wondering, looking at the polls there for independence at the moment, why do you think they haven't shifted at the moment? Do you think it's because Scotland hasn't really felt any real collateral damage from Brexit yet, and that's still to happen, and then we'll start to see the polls shifting above 50%? I know we have our support for independence has increased in almost every poll that I've noticed. It's sort of sitting around between 50 and 45, and these sorts of figures. But we'll have to see the collateral from Brexit before they really shift. Because people seem to be listening to an awful lot of rhetoric on both sides of the Brexit debate, and they're maybe sick of it. And maybe the only way they're going to actually understand, that Scotland isn't well served within the Union of the United Kingdom. Maybe the only way they're going to understand that is having less money in their pocket, losing their job, etc. No one wants to see that happen, but I suspect that is precisely what is going to happen in time.
I think people are more aware of what is happening now than they were even a month or 6 weeks ago. Anecdotally, and you can only go by people who talk to you, more people talk to me than ever before. More people talk to my ministerial team than ever before. We had a strategy session last week, and I think it was clear from that. People are waking up to this. The no-deal stuff has energised and galvanised people quite a lot. because I think they thought up until then this was all a political debate. But